I want to welcome you to another video drasha. This week's Torah portion is Tavo. And we're going to discuss the beginning of this Torah portion, which starts by describing a very interesting ritual. And the Torah says, when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and you take possession of it and you settle it, you shall bring from the first fruits of the land to the place where God will choose, which of course will be Jerusalem, and you bring them there to the priest, the Kohen, and you bring the first fruits in a basket, and you give the basket to the Kohen, and you say, I acknowledge that the Lord your God has brought me into the land which he swore to our fathers. And then the Torah continues. The Kohen puts the basket down, and then the Israelite, the person who brought the first fruits, says the following. And the Torah says, you shall then recite as follows before the Lord your God. My father was a wandering Aramean. He went down to Egypt, few in number, and sojourned there. And there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Therefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil which you, O Lord, have given me. So the ritual of bringing the first fruits, when did this take place? It took place on Shavuot, which is still called Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of first fruits. And this ritual, which is described here, in which each Israelite brings the first fruits in a basket and gives it to the Kohen, and then recites this story. And really, the ritual consists of reciting this story, which is the essential story of Jewish history. It is the story of how we went down to Egypt, we were enslaved there, we cried out to God, and God took us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm. This is the essential story of Judaism, and this tells us how important telling this story is. Now, I've spoken over the last couple of years several times on the importance of the Exodus from Egypt in Judaism, how it is a part of almost everything we do in Judaism. And here's another example, that the ritual that was performed on Shavuot, which after all, that's not the holiday of the Exodus from Egypt. Shavuot is the holiday of the giving of the Torah. But on Shavuot, as part of bringing the first fruits to the temple, one needed to tell this story, the story of Jewish history, the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And imagine the picture. I mean, this is really quite a dramatic thing if you imagine it in your mind. Imagine the throngs of people, literally thousands and thousands of people who came from all over the land of Israel to Jerusalem on Shavuot and brought their baskets with the first fruits, and then they gave it to the Kohen and then recited this story. Imagine this, what an event this must have been. Well, what eventually happened is the temple was destroyed and we could no longer bring the first fruits. We couldn't bring the basket and give it to the Kohen. So what happened to the story? Well, the story got moved to the Passover Haggadah. And I imagine that as I read this passage from our Torah portion, some of these phrases were familiar to you. And if you look at the Passover Haggadah, you'll see that really the center of the story in the Haggadah is this recitation that we have in today's Torah portion with commentary. So that the Haggadah takes this story and breaks it into small pieces and comments on each piece. This, by the way, is very similar to what we call Midrash. Midrash takes biblical passages, breaks them into pieces, and comments on the meaning of each of the phrases. So that ultimately the core of the Haggadah is this story that we find that really was part of the ritual of Shavuot, of bringing the first fruits, and it is turned into a kind of midrash, and that's what we really have in the Haggadah. And I wanted to just read a little bit of this for you so that you'll see how this works. The Haggadah says that, come and learn that Pharaoh only wanted to destroy the males, but Laban, who of course was Jacob's father-in-law, Laban wanted to uproot the entirety. And it quotes then our passage, Arami Oved Avi. Now, when I translated that a minute ago, I translated it, my father was a wandering Aramean. The Haggadah understands these words differently, and the fact is the Hebrew is a bit ambiguous, and it can be understood in more than one way. So in the Torah, it seems that the meaning is, as we said, my father was a wandering Aramean, but the Haggadah takes this to mean an Aramean, referring to Laban, destroyed or wanted to destroy my father. And so that is the text that is brought here to prove that Laban wanted to uproot all of the Jewish people. The Haggadah then goes on to say, he, meaning our father, went down to Egypt, and the Haggadah then comments, he was compelled by God's decree. And then it continues, and sojourned there. And then the Haggadah comments, this teaches that Jacob, our father, did not go down to settle in Egypt, but only to sojourn there. Few in number. As it is said, your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 persons, and now God has made them as the stars of the heavens for a multitude. And then it continues, and it gives the story, although not all of it. In the Haggadah, this story ends with the fact that God took us out of Egypt. It doesn't actually continue to the part that says, and brought us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. But really, this is the core of the Haggadah. It is a kind of midrash on the passage that we have in today's Torah portion, which we have seen was part of the ritual on Shavuot for the bringing of the first fruits. And the fact is that it is the telling of this story which is really at the essence of Judaism, and how it was made into this ritual of everybody coming to Jerusalem and telling this story. Now, of course, we don't have the ritual of the first fruits anymore. We don't have the temple. We can't go to the priest, to the Kohen, to bring the basket with the first fruits and then to recite the story. And this reminds me of a Hasidic story that I heard many years ago, and I've always found it a very meaningful story. And again, I think it tells us just how important telling the story is, knowing the story and reciting it. And so the story is told that a calamity faced the Jewish people during the lifetime of the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidism. The Baal Shem Tov went into a certain place in the forest, and there he built a special fire, and he said a special prayer, and a miracle occurred, and the Jewish people were saved. In the next generation, when again a potential calamity faced the Jewish people, the Baal Shem Tov's disciple, the Maggid of Mezrich, went into that same place in the forest where the Baal Shem Tov had gone, and there he said, I don't know how to make the special fire, but I still know the special prayer, and he said it, and it sufficed, and the Jewish people were saved. In the next generation, when again there was trouble for the Jewish people, his disciple, Rabbi Leib Moshe of Sasov, he went into that same place in the forest where the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrach has gone, but he said to the Kodesh Baruch Hu, I don't know how to make the fire, and I don't even know the words of the prayer, but the fact that I've come to this place has to suffice, and it did. And in the next generation, when there was a need for it again, his disciple, Rabbi Israel of Rejin, he sat in his house in his chair, and he said to the Kodesh Baruch Hu, I don't know how to make the fire, I don't know the words of the special prayer, I don't even remember where the special place in the forest is, but I still know the story, and that has to suffice. And it did. Good Shabbos.